We are currently using Zoom meetings to deliver this training to you. This allows you, the attendees, to go on and off mute for Q&A portions of this session. We ask that if you are in this session and you would like to speak, please feel free to go off mute. Larry and I, as we were planning this, we wanted it to be very interactive. We want you all to jump in on the conversation. So please feel free to go off mute if you have a question or would like to contribute to the conversation. If you are not speaking, we ask that you please stay on mute. If you, for whatever reason, cannot turn on your mic or cannot speak during today's training, please feel free to type your comment or your question into the chat. I'll be sure to read that out to Larry, and I believe Larry will be keeping an eye on the chat as well. Another thing I want to note is that this Taos training is being recorded. If at any point you are speaking or asking questions in the chat, please refrain from providing any client-specific information, especially client names. The recording of this session, along with any slides and additional resources made available, will be accessible within 1 week of today's session. And again, you can find that at the Learning and Development SharePoint site located at learning.taos.com. That concludes the housekeeping portion. I will now hand it over to our presenter, Larry Labast. Larry, please take it away.
Oh, thank you, everybody. Can everybody hear me?
Just to yes, make sure I can hear you perfect.
Good. You'll have to excuse at the bottom the text. For some reason, I can't figure out how to turn that off in PowerPoint. PowerPoint decided to turn it on, and it's running with it. So we'll just keep going from there. So this presentation, as you see, is basically on Kismet, what it is and why would I need it for work from home, which is so relevant for today's environment. I do want this to be interactive, so if you have a question, stop and ask. Feel free to ask. We will be switching between at some points. I'll be going through the PowerPoint, then we're actually going to switch to a demo, and then we're going to switch to a quick discussion. I've been asked to talk to you about Acture and kind of why it's important. So,
is it possible that you could share your screen so it's the largest thing and not just a tile?
Actually, I am. I don't see it as that on my Zoom. How big is it on yours?
It looks like it's just your tile on Zoom, Larry.
Oh, I'm really...
You're not sharing your screen.
You can right-click on the tile and select Pin, and it will put it to full screen for you.
Well, yeah, no, we're doing this a little differently. This is not actually going through Zoom because Zoom doesn't work well. But just 1 second, let me see. And is it backwards in writing for you or not?
It is not backwards, Larry.
Okay. Good. So Zoom is actually showing it to me backwards, and that's a whole. But let me ask this: are you seeing it large now or small?
Small.
So for the users that are seeing it small, if you right-click on the Larry Labast's tile and click Pin Video, it should take up your whole screen.
Okay, I've done that, and it helps.
Okay. I'll explain the technical things of what I'm doing here, but I'm not actually using Zoom to share. I'm using a virtual camera driver and some other things. We'll go into that at the end so I can explain why and how, because Zoom's capabilities in doing this is very, very limited in some areas. Plus, let's just say we had some interesting issues actually technically getting this to work. So let me go back to this. All right, so now everybody sees it properly and it looks good. So we're going to move on to the next slide. All right, so number one. I'm not teaching you how to hack, essentially. So just to get a bit of the legalese out of the way, scanning for frequencies, scanning around you is perfectly legal and fine. You're actually allowed to do that in many, many countries. There's actually a few you're not, but Taos really isn't in those countries, so we don't have to worry about that. But what is illegal is if you start using this tool to disassociate equipment you don't under control, which means basically disconnecting someone from their wireless. So again, the idea is that as with anything, pen testing, hacking, or whatever, if you have your own lab, go ahead, have fun. Again, if it's your own network, go ahead, have fun. Do not use this tool to do anything to anybody else that you do not have permission to. Now that we have that out of the way, let's go ahead and go over some of the objectives. Again, we're going to go over why your local Wi-Fi might be slow or congested. I'm going to try to give you a high-level understanding of Kismet and some of its uses, and people don't realize that Kismet does a lot more than just Wi-Fi networks. For example, you can actually do Bluetooth devices. If you attach a software-defined radio, you can scan for other things like aircraft flying overhead. You know, a lot of people do use Kismet for, I'll call it war, walking, driving, and blah, and we'll go through that in a bit. And then we're going to have a quick discussion on Acture, and then I'll open the forum up for people to ask questions. All right, so the problem statement. Right now, with back on March 15th, at least in our area in California, I remember before that, my last Friday at my client in office, we all had prepared. We were thinking it was going to happen, and then all of a sudden, it was announced during the weekend that everybody was working with home, and all the different counties were in lockdown. So basically from there, nobody came into the office. And what this meant was everybody was at home. My client actually had prepared for that about a week earlier and run a test of their VPN, had everybody work from home just to test it and make sure they were all set up and worked. And so that change really triggered just a change in the behavior of home wireless networks versus business networks. For example, there's a lot more stress now on your home network because right now you're sitting at home probably streaming this. At least for some of you. I know for some of the managed services, they're actually maybe in the office, but the majority of our consultants do work from home. And the issue with that is if you're in a single home and you've got an acre of land, you probably got enough space between you and your neighbors that you don't really have to worry about as much wireless interference. Wireless only travels so far. But if you're like some of our consultants I know living in San Francisco, and they're in these large apartment buildings, you've got a ton of wireless networks around. You've got a ton of IoT devices. You even have the building security devices. And all of that is running on the same frequencies. Basically, wireless runs off certain specific frequencies to the standards. So you're getting a lot of congestion. And, what you used to normally worry about, which was Netflix streaming or maybe gaming, now it's getting kind of critical in that if you want to have a good video conference, well, you need to make sure that you've got good bandwidth and such. You also have a lot of people who have no clue about how to securely configure their NAT devices, which basically I call any home Linksys router, ASUS router. They're not really routers; they're NAT devices. They don't actually perform a routing function. They just connect you to one internet connection, and then they pass everything through NAT. So it's a bit of a misnomer, but that's actually the true networking piece of it. And then the other last piece of it is you're going to get a lot of these kids at home or other people who we call them script kiddies, and that's an old term from security, who basically they learn on YouTube, oh, that looks cool. Let me go try this. Let me go try that. And they will try to hack different networks. They'll try to disassociate folks. Now, so you're getting a lot of different, just a lot of different traffic and different things going on around you that you may not have had either as much before or had to worry about before. Anybody have any questions yet? Okay. So what I'll do is when I ask if you have any questions, I'm going to wait about 5 or 10 seconds and then move on if there are none. So what we can do, the first thing is, as my home network here, yes, I have Wi-Fi, but anything important is on Ethernet. Again, it gives me privacy, but really stability. And then when you're flinging around gigabyte files, you also need the speed. It takes me literally minutes to move a file, rather over Wi-Fi it takes a little longer time. Again, it gives you more security. Unless the network plugs into your router directly, they can't affect your network. But if you need wireless, which a lot of places do, maybe you're in an older building which you don't want to sit down and renovate to run Ethernet, and your significant other won't let you have that ugly cable running down the hallway because you can't drill into the walls. Maybe you're in an apartment block that you can't do that. Again, so you may still need to have Wi-Fi. So there's some things that you can do with Kismet that help you optimize your settings. I will also say one other thing that dawned on me as I was creating this is it's not only learning what's around you, but if you run it often enough, you can actually spot if somebody is trying to do something to your network and kind of catch that. You may not be able to specifically find out where they are, but you will be able to at least notice it, and then you can block their MAC address unless they're smart and randomize it. So what do I mean by optimize? So going back into how Wi-Fi actually works just briefly, we won't spend too much time on this unless people want to get into a bit, but basically Wi-Fi works off of frequency ranges that are standardized. They were created, they're agreed to, they're published, and all Wi-Fi devices actually adhere to those standards. And most common too are your typical non-technical person refer them to as 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. Well, it goes a little deeper than that because there's channel separation, there's all sorts of things that come into play there. But that's typically how most people and most routers are sold. You'll see 2.4, you'll see 5, and now you'll see 6 gigahertz as well. And that's really how consumers take these devices. So you're going to find a lot of Linksys devices around you. That's how folks will set it up. They'll typically just plug it in out of the box. Other factors are how the different developers for those devices create the ability for the device to choose channels. So some of them, for example, if you buy one of the more enhanced gaming routers, they'll call it, they actually will have scan for the open frequencies, and they will try to find the best one for you to tell your device to connect to. So when your iPhone, for example, scans looking for your network, your router actually typically will respond on a specific channel saying, this is the channel I'd like to be on. And you can actually go into most routers and force that setting, but most people don't. They actually let the device choose, and some are very good at it and some are very horrible at it. Typically, because you have so many access points out there now, and they're consumer devices. I mean, I know businesses who are deploying these things left, right, and center, and they're putting consumer devices in. Typically you'll find channel 6 and 11 on 2.4 gigahertz networks just flooded, because that's typically what the devices will go to by default at first, and then they may change, they may not. And then some devices just randomly choose channels, and you have no idea what they're going to use near the end. They could just randomly pick 2, could pick, number 10, number 7, you have no idea. So being able to see how busy the channels around you are really can help you find a more open channel, which means you're going to get better throughput, you're going to have a more stable connection, your video conferences will go better, your kids, if they're doing online schooling, will do better, and at night you might be able to actually win that game if you're playing. So, we won't go into this much further because this really, why this works and how it works. We'd have to get into what's called frequency magic, or FM and other radio technologies. I do have a background in that from the military, but it is, we used to call frequency magic instead of frequency modulation because it is magic in some ways. And here's just to give you an idea of the channels and how this works. So if you take a look at the one on the bottom, that kind of shows you that what happens when they talk about frequencies, they're actually talking about a range. You've got a center channel and you've got a range around it, which kind of gives you this bandwidth. Because really, because it's frequency modulated, when you're setting the 1 and 0, you're actually going up and down inside that bubble, is the way to think of it. It knows that the frequency is for example, channel 1, 2.412 gigahertz. You might go to 2.411 to say it's a 0, and you might go back up to 2.412 to say it's a 1. And that's kind of how this works. And then, of course, because you've got a larger band, how you can transmit more data, the short version is you then do that multiple times inside that bubble, and that's what gives you your bit. That's what gives you the ability to send, 10 megahertz per second, or 10 megs per second, 20 megs a second, 100 megs a second, and higher. If you take a look at the colored chart, that gives you the different, you can see why it's getting more complicated and why the different ranges exist. The 2.4 gig has a small number of channels, and then you've got basically the different, I'll call them the bandwidth carriers. Basically, you're at 20 megahertz wide, your different widths, or 40 megahertz wide, and there's different uses for those, and we won't get into that here. Then you see the 5 gigahertz. They expanded it to include more channels, and then from there, in the 6 gig, they've expanded it even more channels because they're expanding the frequency range, the usable frequency range. So you're actually getting larger and larger as we go through, but that does give you more bandwidth throughput. For example, 2.4 gig, you have 60 megahertz of spectrum. Whereas when you get down to the 6 gigahertz, now they're saying you've got 1200 megahertz of spectrum. So again, if you think about slicing it up, that means if you have more slices, you can actually send more bits of data all at once. It does mean more radios and such, but again, we won't go into that now. But that should hopefully give you an idea why it's important to keep those clear, and why, because if you start blocking those, say you block the last third of the, let's go with the 6 gig because they have so much. If you block that last third, you just cut your bandwidth down by a third. If your neighbor's using that section, you can't use it. You're going to have conflicts. Anybody have any questions? I know this is kind of high and theoretical, and we could go in deep, but I don't think we want to right now. But any generalized questions anybody has here? Okay, and if I'm going too fast, let me know. So now we're going to get into Kismet. What is Kismet? So Kismet is known as a wireless detecting application, but it is so much more. It does Wi-Fi. It can also do packet sniff. It can war drive, meaning you can attach a GPS to it and it will take the coordinates, and when you drive by, it will sniff an SSID and it'll log the GPS coordinates saying this SSID, this wireless network is here. It also can be used as a wireless intrusion detection framework, meaning Kismet can be running and it can notice when your neighbor puts up a Wi-Fi that is different and notify you, or if somebody tries to bring up one that simulates yours. They may bring it up saying, I'm going to put up one and it's going to be open. I'm not going to put a passphrase on it. And it will notify you of that saying, hey, this one looks like yours. You might want to take a look and check it out. It can also do more than that. It can be a Bluetooth tracker. So if you add a Ubertooth one, or if you use a Raspberry Pi with a Bluetooth built into it, like the Pi 4, you can actually sniff all the Bluetooth devices around you. You can also, for example, where I live, I'm really close to the road, so I can sniff and watch everybody's iPhone that walks by and find out if they have Bluetooth turned on. I can see, oh yeah, they have Bluetooth turned on, and because just like Wi-Fi MAC addresses and Ethernets, they actually have the first set of octets designates the manufacturer. So again, I can see who walks by when, and then I can gather some information from it depending on the version. Whether it's an old version of Bluetooth, I can actually pull information from it to know who owns the device. If it's the newer ones, Bluetooth then gets encrypted, so it's a little harder to do, but you still can do it. And aircraft tracking, just for the fun of it. If you attach a software-defined radio and just leave it sitting there, it will listen, and aircraft identifiers as they fly over your house are actually unencrypted, and it's perfectly legal for you to sniff them and listen to them. But you can actually pull up saying, oh, this aircraft and this flight flew over my house at this time. So it's got a lot of features. We can go more into it. There is actually penetration testing tools. For example, as you're sniffing Wi-Fi, that's what I was talking about. You can actually disassociate a device from the Wi-Fi network and then capture its reassociation, which there's a actual process it does. So you can capture that entire process, which includes the certificates or passphrases encrypted in hashes, and then you can take them offline and run them through a cracker. And theoretically, if somebody's using a simple password, if somebody's using an unencrypted password, or not unencrypted, sorry, an unencrypted certificate, or if they're using WEP. WEP is very easy to crack, to give you an example. So you can actually do that offline. So you can use Kismet to do the packet cap to identify it. Kismet can kick the person off the network, basically. And when their system automatically reconnects, and they won't even know you've done this, by the way. It happens so fast. You can capture that transaction, and then you can take it offline and crack it. All right, what can I install Kismet on? And I'll give you some information on this and my suggestions, because after the next slide, any Linux distro can be used to run Kismet. You can do it on more. For example, it has been ported to Mac. So you can actually run it on OS X. You can run it Catalina. It does take a little more work. You can also run it on Windows now. It takes a lot of work to get it, but you can do that. Some of the key things are the hardware. So you must have a Wi-Fi adapter. And here's the key thing, which a lot of laptops will not let you do. So you may have to buy a specific adapter, but it must allow this monitor mode. What that means is most Wi-Fi adapters are in live mode, or again, they can connect and they can actually run and connect to SSIDs and other devices. For example, infrastructure mode, ad hoc mode, things like that. What that means is they're actually broadcasting and checking, saying, here I am, who's out there. Well, adapter mode turns that off, and it just listens. And so really you must put it into a monitor mode. And that is one of the critical things. And you can buy, if you don't have one, if your laptop, for example, won't do it, or you buy a Raspberry Pi 3, which doesn't have Wi-Fi, you can be anywhere from 10 to 50 bucks on Amazon to pick up an adapter card, a USB one. You just put it in there and away you go. The other thing for Kismet is the more memory, the better. I have run it on 1 gig of RAM. It was dog slow. I am now running on a Raspberry Pi 4 with 8 gig of RAM. But I'm also doing a little more with it than normal. I've got three Wi-Fi adapters in it and a Bluetooth adapter, so it is capturing a lot more data. However, disk I/O can be disk I/O is really important. The reason is if you're just doing one adapter and you've got a very quiet network around you, or your area is really quiet, it's not going to log that much, and it logs packets. It actually logs a lot of information. But if you have a lot around you and you're using a Raspberry Pi, you can actually overload your SD card, which means Kismet will then crash. If it can't keep up with the disk I/O, it will crash. Kismet is meant to log to disks. You can do it to a RAM drive, which will help speed it up, but then you'll lose the data. Just all sorts of things. But again, if you're doing a standard install, I would definitely suggest at least a serial ATA drive. You can use an SSD, but you will burn the SSD out sooner because Kismet writes a lot of data. And so you will burn out the SSD, and you don't really need the speed unless you're doing a very large, like you're going to DEF CON and you've got 64 different network adapters on it. So unless you're doing something like that, old laptop serial ATA works fine. I'd probably say 2 gig to 4 gig at least, but even 2 gig would be fine. Now, myself, you can do it on a Raspberry Pi. With Raspbian, you've got, which is the default install for the Raspberry Pi. It's the default OS now for the Raspberry Pi. You're going to have to compile your own. Kismet is not in the repos. Now, if you use Kali Linux, which does have a 64-bit version for the Raspberry Pi 4, it's in the package repo. However, the issue that even I've run into on it is it takes so much configuring, getting it from the package repo, installing certain drivers specific to your system. They've really slimmed it down to fit it into the package repo. That, in my opinion, you're better off to use Kali Linux, because Kali comes with all the right drivers for most Wi-Fi cards. And then it'll have most of the libraries you need to compile your own very easily. I had to redo it this morning because of a mistake. And essentially, I could not get the adapters to be seen. So really what I did is I just uninstalled it, app cache, search for search for Kismet, and then app cache app purge Kismet, which removed it completely from the system. And then I grabbed it from Git, and I just went in and did a compile, let it run for about 45 minutes. The Raspberry Pi 4 has, I think, 8 cores now, and it took about 45 minutes to compile, but started it up and boom, instantly it saw everything and everything was configured and working. So again, that's where I would suggest spending a little more time. You may run into problems depending on your OS, like Ubuntu. There are some libraries specific you need. I would always suggest using a security distro because it typically will have the libraries you need, and it's a lot easier to deal with. But the choice can be yours if you want to have some fun. So just comparing the two methods and why. So via the distro, again, if I use 64-bit Kali Linux for this session, again, it's package managed. So if you're just starting out, it's easy to get installed and easy to update. Mostly works out the box, but one of the key things for me is there are fewer plugins if you do it via the distro. There's a lot of plugins out there, a lot of add-ins. For example, being able to take a Wi-Fi network output from Kismet and create a map of SSIDs of your neighborhood if you went out war driving, for example. There's different, if you wanted to do the auth deauth in your own test lab and wanted to have it automatically copy over and then start doing the hash cracking. Again, there's different plugins for that, but unfortunately for the distro, you've got a very few. It is easier to configure. And that is a key thing because it comes with a set of pre-configured config files. So they're already set up to log to your to your directory that you're in. It's already set up with all the standard that they suggest for the operating system as well. So it's just really plug and play almost. It is the previous stable version, so again, that sometimes, some people like that, some people don't. Whereas if you go to from the compiled from source, which is my preferred method, all the plugins work, but you will have to compile most of them yourself. So you compile, Kismet, then you install the different plugins. The latest stable or newer version, I typically run with the latest stable. Again, it's kind of an easy configuration. It's not easier than the distro, but you also have more hardware options. If you want to get the Ubertooth 1, which is a device to sniff Bluetooth to run, you should go this way because the drivers are included when you compile. It can be painful, though, depending on the OS. There are some times where you forget a library, you forget to install a library on your Linux system, and you're wondering, why isn't this compiling? Why is this compiling? So you have to go back through. So it can be a little more painful. And I know everybody's probably getting bored a little bit now, so what I'm going to say is we're soon going to get to a demo. I'll take you through it. I've actually had it in the background capturing data for about 30 minutes in my area here, so I will take you through and show you it in a little bit here. So just don't fall asleep yet. Get another coffee. So what I'm going to show you is, this is my setup, what I did, and I put in some costs. I have a lab that I keep repurposing hardware, but if you wanted to go build this way yourself, this is, I would consider to be it's a non-portable version. So it's got a Raspberry Pi 4 with 8 gig of RAM. The SD card is only to boot from. I've actually moved everything to the hard drives. I do use a low-profile CPU fan because it does get warm. If you do certain things on it, for example, it is actually a database in the background. So if you start doing some of the de-auth and auth things, it will get a little warm. I'm using an alpha long-range card, and what that means, it actually has 2 radios in it, and it's got 2 larger antennas. So I can go a further distance than a lot of the ones that are even built into the Mac card, into the Macs, for example. Anything with an antenna like that that's encased typically won't go as far as this. I had 2 serial ATA drives laying around. The Ubertooth 1 I bought at DEF CON. I was there, and they were selling them. They're very hard to get a hold of because they manufacture them only in small batches. A Noctura fan for the hard drives just to keep them cool because they are in cases. I did actually print my own cases and adapted holders for my 3D printer. So that's kind of the setup, and it's not pretty. There's a bunch of wires, but it does work. All right, so before we get in the demo, I'm not going to go through the install because that would literally take about an hour or two, and I'm sure that people, again, the idea is you go play, you learn yourself. I think that's the best way in this. It's not difficult. You're not going to break anything. If you want help or a guide, you can message me after. The biggest thing is your Wi-Fi adapter. For example, if you use the one I chose, it uses a different set of drivers than are built in. They're still in the package repo, which is nice, but you have to manually install them, and that's the largest problem. There is no lab for this that you can do because it is a hardware-based lab. Again, we have to set up the hardware. You have to install Kali, configure it. I did do a couple of special mounts. What I did is actually mounted the hard drive. The first one is actually my home directory, and then the second one is specifically the logs for Kismet to log to. But then I also repurposed my equipment for other projects. I think this has been about 2-3 weeks I've been working on this, just playing with different things to get it so it looks good and works. And that's probably the longest this equipment's actually been put together. Normally I'll rip it apart and do other things with it. So again, if you want some pointers, things like, and you're doing it yourself, please feel to reach out. Anybody have any questions before I start showing, getting into the demo? No? Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is you should see my screen switch to, this is actually, I use Secure CRT, an SSH session into the device. And what it's doing is basically just outputting just all the different new Wi-Fi devices it sees in their Mac. This is just more console than anything, just so you know it's alive. I will output errors here. Typically, you can run this as a service on the box as well, so you won't see this. It'll just go to the bit bucket. But I'm just running this from the command line. I just log in and I type Kismet, and it started up and it was running. All right, so some of the meat of this now. So this is actually the Kismet web interface. Can you see it properly? Does it, or is it too small?
Looks good.
Okay. So what you'll see here, so when you won't see this at first, all this data from Kismet when you first start it. Unless you define it in the config files, Kismet will start blank, and you'll actually have to go into here into data sources. Just to get, what they call is you can connect Kismet to local, meaning attached Wi-Fi devices, or you can actually set up a remote source. You know, say, let's just say I'm doing a penetration test. I would actually configure a small Raspberry Pi Zero or something else, which has a Wi-Fi and an Ethernet, and plug it into the client and leave it there, and I'll have it log data to a larger, kind of think of it as a client server-based Kismet. And so you can do that, but by default, Kismet will find whatever is on your system locally, and it calls it a data source. And so as you see with these ones here, I've already enabled them. You actually come into it, and then you click enable, and you can customize it really here. What it's doing right now, just to show you on this is the WLAN 0, which I believe this one is actually built on the Raspberry Pi because it's a Broadcom. You can tell that by the hardware here. The BRCM is actually the Broadcom, and my other one's an Alpha, which that comes down to the chipsets. Raspberry Pi uses Broadcom for Wi-Fi. Alpha uses Realtek. So anyways, with this one here, we can tell it's a Broadcom, and so we can also tell it's running. You can actually close it and start it if you want. Right now, it is hopping between all these different frequencies you see here, checking it out. So for example, this one is doing the 802.4 and the 5 gigahertz ranges. And it's hopping, spends 5 seconds on one, hops to the next, spends 5 seconds on one, hops to the next. And so that's how it scans, because very few Wi-Fi devices can scan all at once. If you go onto YouTube, you can actually Google, I believe it is DEF CON, and what was it? I want to say Octo Pineapple, or it's from Hack 5. Basically, a fellow took 64 pineapples, which Pineapple is another Wi-Fi scanning device with Kismet on it. He connected them all together so he could scan all frequencies at once. Ended up with this monster backpack. But that's the only way you can actually scan all the frequencies at once, because every Wi-Fi card will only scan one channel at a time. Or you can actually hit all, and it will again still go frequency hop and scan through. But that's essentially, so you come in here, you enable it, you let it capture, and then when you see these graphs going by, you see it actually is, that's what each device is seeing, so you know it's active. Then you come back to here, and this is where you can start getting into some meat of the thing. Right now I'm showing all devices, but what we're going to do first is going to switch to SSIDs. Oh, there we go. Again, it is a database, so you do have to give it a second. It's a live database, and open it up. But as you see here, where I am in the middle of nowhere, you actually can see we have a number of Wi-Fi around us. Now, I'm just going to put it out there so everybody knows. My wife manages an RV park, so we live near there. And that's why you see a bit about RV park there. But as you see here, Ghetto RV, it's amazing. Everybody installs their own RV into, or their own Wi-Fi into their RVs, because they're basically big chunks of metal, and you have to. Otherwise, you won't get anything. You know, that one is different. That's somebody's advertising, and it's so interesting. But you see, these ones here concern me, because as you see the encryption types, there should only be one, in my opinion. It should only be guest networks that are open without encryption. So again, these ones concern me from a security perspective. They're not my network, so one way I don't really care. But we should really see WPA2 is the best encryption to use. So again, it shows you the Wi-Fi network. It shows you the channel it's using. It shows you the encryption type. It shows you how many devices actually are responding. Like someone's got a Linksys, at least it is encrypted, but they've left it to default. And you see they've got 2 devices on it and advertising. And if I click on the device, you know, I can actually go into the SSID, and we can start pulling more information out of it. You can view the device details. You can see when it first responded. Like I'll typically leave this up for a week. And you can see how many times a device comes on and offline. And as you see here, you can actually pull a lot of information from the actual device, or from the SSID, I should say. If we wanted to go one step further, if we go back here, we can actually start looking at different devices. Anybody have any questions on SSIDs before I move on? Okay. And just so everybody knows, down here you'll see the messages. These are live. This is actually it running a live tally of what it finds. As it finds new devices, it will just log them and show it here, but it keeps track of the devices here.
Barry, I was gonna say the font is blurry for us.
The font is blurry for you? Okay, let me see. Unfortunately, I don't think I can control the font. Let me see if I zoom in.
First, the text is, maybe if you zoom in, might be.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't control the font, but let me control Chrome and see if I zoom in at the web browser. Is that any better?
It looks a little bit better. Is anyone able to see it, or?
Yeah, it looks like a slow upload, or it's downsizing the resolution.
Yeah, I love Zoom. Different discussion though. I'm transmitting in 4K right now, so it must be Zoom taking it down. Just give me 1 second here to see video settings on Zoom. And there they are.
Yeah, Zoom is going to downscale it to 1080p.
Yeah, I've got HD enabled, so it is Zoom. Zoom is just downgrading it as we go. So what we'll have to do, I'll probably suggest that you look at the recordings because it'll be recording, but I'm also recording it on my side as well, so it'll have a better quality. It should be a 4K on my side. So just going back into here, if we look at all devices, you can actually see there, it will let us, you can zoom in and we can actually show all the access points. I am going to have to back out a little bit here because it's, there we go. So it'll show you all the access points. See the type is Wi-Fi AP all the way through. We can actually then, if we wanted to, you can go by data sources, meaning I'm going to do the Ubertooth one for fun of it because that is a Bluetooth device. And as you see here, we have all of these different Bluetooth devices around, including some that are transmitting actively. So these may be people who are connected to their earbuds. Like this one here, you can actually see live packets going through. That person is probably on a call. And then if you add in the plugins, you can actually then go and, well, frankly, if it's not encrypted, which some of the older versions of BLE aren't, some of the older versions of Bluetooth aren't, you can actually listen in. Unfortunately, it says BTLE device all the time. That's not quite correct. So there still are some bugs. It is open source, but still, here's an active one. They're constantly transmitting. So again, that's someone's Bluetooth device. The signal strength here tells me they're not too far away. And again, you can kind of go in. This is a randomized one, so it's probably a newer device, which means I won't be able to probably crack it, I'll bet. But again, there's a lot of information you can grab from here. Bluetooth is wireless. Regardless of, I know we call Wi-Fi typically the 2.45 and 6 gigahertz, you know, our network connections. But Bluetooth really is a wireless protocol. It goes over the airwaves. It goes over frequency magic as well. So it is. So let's see, what is BTLE? And again, you can kind of find out some different modes. And if we want to keep going, if you want to get specific here, we can actually go into, we can go on the, what is this particular device? See, this is my third network interface on the system. And it's showing us the Wi-Fi clients. As you see, this one is active. It shows how much data it's been listening to since we discovered the device. And it seems to be fairly inactive because the amount of data it's sending and receiving is small. But as you see, it is live. So again, this is all information that you would want to take in and you would want to analyze and look at. Now, if you're looking at just being able to see who's using what channel, Kismet is good for that because it has a built-in channel coverage section. You can actually bring this up and it will show you what channels are, first of all, this is the channel coverage. You can go through the estimated hopping, and this shows you your device, what it's looking at. But when you combine this with looking at, it's showing me this WLAN 1 is doing the 2.4 gigahertz range. And why do I know that? Because it's got this small number of channels. My WLAN 2 is doing the 5 gigahertz range. And how can I tell? Because it's doing a large amount of channels. And that's the quick and dirty way of looking at this. If we start now where is it? There's the, again, and you get more information. This is the amount of packets being passed around me. So I've got very low amount of drop packets because we're frankly not that flooded out here. But you can see the incoming packets. That's actually a lot within these minutes. Again, that means that people are around me, they're transmitting. I would expect if you were in an apartment block, this to be in the thousands. Does anybody have any questions or any comments? Anybody have any discussions?
I've got one.
Go ahead.
How much data are you using up? Is like a gigabyte a week, or is it much less or more?
You can tune it. I typically will find in a busy network. So in my area, I did about 500 gig. I captured 500 gig in about a week. But I did that over, I've been preparing for this since Memorial Day. September long weekend. I always get the two confused if it's Memorial Day or which. But the September long weekend, over that weekend, because we were busy, I had over, I think, it's amazing. People bring so many Wi-Fi networks with them. We had over 350 Wi-Fi networks around us. And I was able to capture just from home with this setup. Again, I can get you links to the actual, if you take a look at the Wi-Fi adapter, it's got two large antennas, they're about 6 inches. I was able to capture probably about 500 gig of data. And this is not actually capturing the streams. This is just capturing the connections, disconnects, and the speeds. I'm not actually doing packet capturing with this yet. That, of course, would then be more. So from I guess in the context, what are you looking for in that question?
Just how big of a hard drive to buy?
Well, again, it depends on your area. Do you live? If you're around, you should be able to tell this just by going and looking at your phone, for example, just to see how many networks are around you. If you've got a small amount of networks, I would use, if you have an old hard drive around. I mean, I typically have used 500 gig, 300 gig, no problem at all. Myself, I've got two 1 terabyte drives in here just because I'm not going to erase the data. I'm going to let it run for a while and do an analysis on it. And I wouldn't bother with an SSD for this because just of the sheer amount of writes. Yes, it's nice and fast and it's cool, but you don't need that much speed, unless you're doing a mass amount of, like I said, the fellow who built the OctoPineapple. Unless you're doing that many streams at once, if you're just doing one or two, you should be more than enough with a serial ATA drive, more than fast enough. That said, an SD card, if you're putting it on a Raspberry Pi, I have actually had it fail when I've tried to do captures and such, just because the sheer disk I/O it can create. Does anybody have any other questions? A pretty quiet crew, because unfortunately what you're going to get is the Acture items in a few minutes. So again, the idea behind this is once you add in, again, this is the memory in use of Kismet. And as you see, the number of devices versus the memory isn't that bad. I've got 505 devices it's monitoring, and it's using 62 meg. And this is not tuned. This is straight out of the box. So it is fairly, do I need 8 gig? No, but I'm going to be doing more things later. I'm going to add in some more of the plugins and the other tools and play with it. And just see more.
Do you have in this demo ability to show how do you configure those alerts? That, let's say, like if there is another SSID that is trying to simulate your network or something like that.
That we'd have to add in. There's actually some plugins you need to add in for that. So not in this demo. That would actually need an entire another demo itself to go through. And I would actually prefer if we had a couple that people could play with as well. But I can get you some information on that. Who was speaking there?
Peter.
Peter. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Peter. I'm just looking. The reason I'm looking over to the left-hand side is I got 3 monitors, and I'm looking. I got zoom on that one. One thing actually just cool that I will show, but unfortunately, I don't have any aircraft flying over me now. This actually has built in the ADB SCB Live, which means I've got a software-defined radio attached. I have a GPS attached. Unfortunately, my GPS, because I had to restart about an hour ago, it's just a little round device I've attached to the USB. It has not locked into the satellites yet because it's on the wrong side of the house. The house doesn't really get, well, let's just say the satellite connectivity there is not that good. But this is more just to show you, it will actually, out of the box, with the right equipment, just start scanning. It uses OpenStreetMaps, and it will show you what aircraft are flying over you and where, because they have to broadcast that, and they do broadcast it with their GPS coordinates as well. So this is actually built in. It's just a little fun, cool thing. I have no idea why they built it in, other than it's cool and fun, because from a networking perspective, it's actually useless. So now here we'll show one thing that will make your looking. So if you're using this to scan your Wi-Fi networks and you want to know the frequencies, this is an easy graphical way, and this is live currently. I'm hoping you can see at the bottom. This shows me where the majority of devices exist, how many are on each channel, and what channel they're using. So for example, I know in this 2.446 gigahertz, and we'd have to, let me see if I can switch that to 802.11. There we go. This shows you more the channels being used. You know, well, it says -1. You can actually do that all the way up to 173. What it does here is it mixes the different Wi-Fi types together from, you know, the 802.11 from the ABGN and all the way up. I should include X shortly here. But if you go through here again, you can see, you know, this is channel 7.8 and it's got 7 devices on it. Right here, this 12.4 has 8 devices on it. So you can actually look and see what frequencies are free, what frequencies are open. I usually like to let this run for a few minutes, just because, as you see, they are changing as devices transmit and receive. And it helps you understand what areas look. So for example, I'm noticing here up channel 100 to 136 aren't used. So for myself personally, that's probably where I would set my Wi-Fi router to, or my Wi-Fi NAT device, or my access points. I would set them to try to prefer those channels. You should never lock a device. You'll see in a lot of the consumer mode devices, they will call it locking. But in a real access point, that you set the channel as preferred, because if something goes wrong with that channel, you always need a backup. You always want to let it go. But again, you can do different things. Like, again, here's a nice graph to show you what channels are being used and how heavily. This one's in the past minute. Let's go the past hour, because I've not been running it longer than that. So again, in this one here, it's showing you the different, based on the color schemes, the different channels used, and I'm looking at the light blue is very lightly used. It only started used in the last few minutes. Prior to that, the light blue, which is channel 44, actually, sorry, my mistake, 14 all the way through 44. And as you see, the numbers are there. It's actually doesn't appear anywhere in these first set of graphs for the past, I want to say 40 minutes. It's only in the past 10 minutes, maybe 15, that it started appearing. I know I've covered a lot. We got about 10 minutes, and I've been asked to touch on Acture, so I want to ask anybody if there's any questions or if folks want to discuss anything. Okay, and just to give you guys some ideas of this is what the device looks like. I actually went and printed off. This is actually a specific case. This holds 2 hard drives. I bought the 2 USB adapters for serial ATA, and the Pi's on top, as you see. I did on top of that another fan, and then there is a fan in the back here. As you see right there, this is not mine. I actually printed this off. This is where you get the templates on Thingiverse for it. Made a nice little case for it. It is heavy. The 2 hard drives are old style. They're probably, I think I got a 2012 and a 2013 and they're 1 terabyte. But it does run and it does perform well. So unfortunately, my cat did find the power off switch for the USB hub accidentally one time. And he took the hard drives down, and yeah. So make sure if you buy a USB hub, always try to get it without a power button if you have animals. With that said, does any last questions before we launch back into the next one, which is going to be talking about Acture? Any comments? You guys totally bored? You think I am? Oh, let me talk about war driving. Let me go back here. That is one thing I wanted to bring up. All right, so war driving. War anything. Basically, if you attach a GPS unit to it, as you see here, I use a specific one. GPSD and GPSD clients are built into every distro. They're part of the package repo. You install them, you configure it. Most times, if you're using the USB GPS, it'll be USB/USB TTY0. But basically, that adds the capability to Kismet to be able to log where you found the Wi-Fi network. You know, you can do war driving, drive your vehicle, war walking, you know, stick it in your backpack, walk around the neighborhood. Some people have gone war hiking, and I don't know why you'd bother, because again, you're in the forest or a desert. Do you really think there's going to be Wi-Fi out there? The fun one is, and I've got these here, I put links in there and I can share them with people. It's called War Pets. One fellow for DEF CON, and you can Google DEF CON War Pets, he weaponized his pets. Basically, he created a Kismet on a Wi-Fi device and stuck it on his cat's collar and let the cat outside and watched where it went. And so he actually tracked it and traced it, and he found it was kind of fun. And you can even see the cat's path. So, you know, again, the idea being that you can use Kismet for many different things. It's not just finding around your networks. You can also track. And a lot of these maps that you see on the internet where it says what free Wi-Fi is open where actually are generated from people walking around with Kismet or, you know, war driving with Kismet. Okay, any last minute questions before Acture? Any feedback? Are you guys totally bored or what?
No, this is great.
All right, and one last thing on this again. If you want, I can send you. I actually buy most of my things from Amazon except for the 3D printing. So I can send you links to that if anybody's interested in the specific cards or things like that. If you have questions, comments, if you want to dig deeper into things, let me know. If you guys would like to get into actually plugins and how to use them, you know, again, this is all feedback that you guys can give. I wanted to keep this one kind of very high level, and I hope I did, but understandable. So if there's no other questions, I'll give about 10 seconds. We'll go ahead and get into Acture. I want to spend a few minutes on that.
Thanks, Larry. I am going to hop in. And speaking of feedback, the perfect segue, I am going to send out a link in the Zoom chat for everyone to please fill out a feedback survey. And if there are any other resources or follow-up demos you would like Larry to provide, please make sure you mention that in the feedback survey. And then, yeah, we'll make sure that Larry gets that info and we'll have a follow-up if that's what you guys would like. Yeah, that's it on my end. So please fill that out before you leave today. Then I'll hand it back to Larry to talk about Acture.
All right, thanks. And one thing I want to mention on what else you'd like to see, it doesn't have to be just related to Kismet. So I've been studying for my licensed pen tester for about a year now. That typically is a 2-year process. If you guys would like me to do more on actual pen testing and other tools, again, Kismet's actually a useful tool. I find for, you can use it for not just for pen testing, but you can use it for, you know, optimizing your home network. But there, if you want specifics or you'd like to get into specifics, please put that in the feedback form as well. And then maybe I can talk to Renee and we can see about doing more based on your feedback. So moving into Acture now, because we only have a few minutes left. I don't know if you guys remember, but a couple months ago, it was kind of announced that Taos had this Acture product that we came out with. And really, it was developed by, he's left the company now, but by our previous director of product, myself and Tim Clark, we kind of all participated in it. and really came about because of people working from home. Working from home really has changed how businesses are looking at security. Before they look at security, we just want to keep our face out of the newspapers. We don't want to have an incident where we have to announce. And what happened was they realized that it's not just about not getting your data center hacked, but now you have people working at home with their laptops, and now you've got to worry about their network, and you've got to worry about do they have too much access, and what do you do, and the work experience, and the whole model changed. And so it really became a top priority from right away, starting in March and April. CIOs were starting to look at it, and I'm going to say, frankly, from a security standpoint, we're going to call it they started finally listening. So what happened is Acture came along, and Acture was developed at Taos by Taos, and the idea is it's a product we can sell. And as consultants, why is it important for you to know this? Well, frankly, it comes down to, this is how we keep Taos going. This is how we keep ourselves employed, myself being a consultant as well. There's all sorts of benefits to actually helping the sales force sell this product. Again, my biggest thing is I'm selfish. I want to stay employed. So I try to get any of our products in where I can. Acture, again, just short version of this because we're getting short on time, is it's meant to be a framework and a strategy that we can then productize, to implement at a client. So we start off with, really teaching and educating them. They can gain visibility into their work. There is a quick response to different, not only incidents, but also needs in their environment. For example, my current client right now, they had one of their customers, their own customers, say, we need you to do X, Y, Z. Well, that's what I'm there for, is helping them. So again, this is where Acture can kind of help them, get them ready for things like that. It'll bring enterprise level security, and it also, the biggest thing in it is it really comes down to workforce credential protection, meaning identity lifecycle management and identity and access management rolled into one. Really, it's meant to help companies work from everywhere. Acture is kind of our product at Taos. It's a combination of Service Desk, Operations Center, and our professional services. We help companies get there first using the professional services. As you can see down here, zero-touch provisioning, meaning we ship you a laptop at home, you turn it on, and boom, it just works for you. Single sign-on, assessment, design, and planning. That's all part of the professional services. And then it rolls into our managed service team to help them manage it. So once they're secure, once they're efficient, security is not just about keeping you safe. You also have to be efficient. It kind of rolls into that next level of helping you stay that way. Again, we've already talked a bit about this. The idea is that eventually everything is out of the box. You come, as if you read the little blurb from a client there, basically the same setup before would have to take an entire day. Now they can spend just under 2 hours from home setting a new employee up and then managing and maintaining them. So it makes life easy on everybody. It's not just about security, but it's making life easy. And that's really the end of the slide deck. On Acture, again, the idea behind Acture, let me just kill this. The idea behind Acture is that the idea is taking the strategy of the remote secure workforce and breaking it down into components that you can actually implement at a client, making sure they have identity access management in place, making sure that they have control of the desktops to a level that they want or need. Some clients will say, I want to let engineers be engineers, let them have fun. So you can do that. Some will say, oh, we got to have it restricted down because we can't have this. So again, it's taking that strategy, putting it into a framework, and then deploying it. And again, the idea is if your client is struggling with how do we make sure our end user, our people at home, are safe, stay safe, but also that they don't infect the company, whether they have data centers, whether they have AWS or cloud, Acture and Taos can actually help them get there quickly and fast. Todd, I just see what apps make up Acture. It depends on the client because, for example, if you're Microsoft, we would take a company who's using Microsoft and use Intune, a combination of Intune, depending on their licensing level of Microsoft. They can actually, if you've got an E5 license, you can use DLP and other things as well. So it really depends on the client. You can do this with AWS and GCP as well to a certain point. The idea being that you're controlling the end client, but you still need something to be able to push. So we can get into more details if you like. There's actually a whole training deck that marketing has that I can help translate, I'll call it, if you like somewhere else. But again, the idea is that remote workforce strategy, taking it down to a framework that they can then execute on. And really it helps them. I guess the way to say it, you as a consultant, if you can see, okay, CM Douglas, maybe just put that in your comments, and then Renee maybe can schedule something, because I can help take you all through. Maybe we need to do an Acture one, Renee, on this, because they're getting a couple of comments on they'd like to see the slide deck and then talk about what happens. Maybe we need a training on Acture for the consultants themselves.
Yeah,
That
it
might be
sounds
good.
good. This is actually an ask we've gotten before, so we'll definitely get working on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so what I want to do is just, we're over time by a minute, but I wanted to ask anybody if they have any other questions. Anything else that they want to talk about? No comments from the peanut gallery? Well, I must have done a reasonable job then, so.
Yeah, well, I see a thank you from Cameron in the chat, but I think, Larry, it was great. We're already getting feedback coming in, so again, I appreciate everyone, and I'll be able to share that feedback with you. Again, we are a bit over time, but I thank everyone for staying on the call. Thank you to Larry for this awesome training. It does look like we're gonna need a little bit of a follow-up from today's training. So again, everyone, we appreciate you attending. Larry, we appreciate all the work you put into this. And if that's okay, Larry, I'd love to get the version of the recording that you have, just to see which one's clear, so folks can see some of that text during the demo. And that's the one that I will upload to SharePoint for everyone to view later.
Okay, we can do that, yep.
Sounds good. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Again, we'll have the recording up by tomorrow morning, and have a great rest of your Wednesday. Bye.
Cheers,
all.
everybody. Bye.